The scent of old paper and bergamot was Elara's favorite perfume. It was the smell of her life's work, the Pet Ale and Spine bookshop, a sanctuary nestled in a quiet corner of the city where towering oaks whispered secrets to the ivy-clad brick walls. Here, within this fortress of stories, she was the queen, the curator, the quiet guardian of fictional lives. At 32, her own story had felt comfortably predictable, a gentle river flowing towards a horizon of peaceful solitude. That was, until Liam walked in. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that usually belonged to Mrs. Henderson and her quest for the gentlest romance novels. The bell above the door chimed, and the light from the street shifted, framing a silhouette that made Elara's well-ordered thoughts stutter. He was tall, with the kind of shoulders that looked like they could carry burdens, and hair the color of dark honey, slightly unruly as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes she noticed first, a clear, warm gray, like the sea on a cloudy morning. "I'm looking for something expansive," he'd said, his voice a pleasant baritone that resonated in the quiet space. He wasn't looking at the shelves, but at her. "Expansive," Elara had replied, wiping a smudge of dust from her fingers onto her apron. "That's a dangerous word in a place like this. It could lead you to Tolstoy or to a very long-winded book on mycology." A slow smile had spread across his face, crinkling the corners of those remarkable eyes. "A risk I'm willing to take. Maybe something in between." That was how it began. With a recommendation for The Shadow of the Wind, a conversation that stretched into an hour, and a tentative agreement to continue their debate on the merits of unreliable narrators over coffee. Their first official date was a revelation. Liam was an architect, not of cold, imposing structures, but of sustainable, living spaces that blended with the environment. He spoke of light and shadow, of community and home, with a passion that mirrored her own for narrative and character. He was kind, funny, and he listened, not just waited for his turn to speak, but truly listened, his gaze fixed on her as if she were the most fascinating story he'd ever encountered. Weeks melted into a month, a blur of shared laughter, lingering kisses, and the thrilling, terrifying sensation of walls she didn't even know she had crumbling to dust. She learned he was fiercely protective of his family, especially his mother, a widow who had raised him and his sister single-handedly. "She's a force of nature, my mum," he said one evening, his fingers laced with hers as they walked through the park. "Her name is Genevieve Thorne. She built her interior design business from nothing. She's tough, but it comes from a place of deep love." The name, Thorne, sent a faint, almost imperceptible shiver down Elara's spine, a distant echo from a childhood memory. But she dismissed it. Thorne wasn't an uncommon name. It couldn't be. The universe wasn't that cruel, nor that cliché. It was on a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday, exactly 6 weeks after he'd first walked into her shop, that he invited her to his family's annual summer garden party. "It's a big deal," he warned, a nervous edge to his usually calm demeanor. "Mum goes all out. I'd really like you to meet her." Elara's heart soared. This was a milestone, a sign that what they had was serious. She spent an anxious hour picking out the right dress, a simple but elegant lilac sundress, and rehearsing what she would say to the formidable Genevieve Thorne. The Thorne estate was a stunning display of modern architecture meeting timeless landscape, exactly as Liam had described his work. The air hummed with the chatter of well-dressed guests and the clinking of champagne flutes. Liam's hand was a steadying presence on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. "There she is," he murmured, nodding towards a woman standing near a magnificent weeping willow, holding court. Genevieve Thorne was impeccably dressed in a cream silk trouser suit, her posture ramrod straight, her silver-blonde hair cut in a severe, elegant bob. Even from a distance, her energy was magnetic and intimidating. As they approached, Elara's smile felt frozen on her face. The woman turned, and her sharp, intelligent eyes, the same gray as Liam's, swept over her son with affection before landing on Elara. The affection vanished, replaced by a flicker of scrutiny, and then something else. Something cold and deeply unsettling. "Mother, this is Elara," Liam said, his voice brimming with pride. "Elara, my mother, Genevieve." Elara extended her hand. "It's so lovely to meet you, Mrs. Thorne. Your home is breathtaking." Genevieve's handshake was brief, her fingers cool. Her gaze was a laser, dissecting Elara's features one by one. The polite smile on her lips didn't reach her eyes. "Elara," she repeated, the name a slow, deliberate syllable on her tongue. An unusual name. And what is it you do, Elara? I own a bookshop in the city center. Pale and spined. The change was instantaneous and electric. The already cool expression iced over completely. A muscle in Genevieve's jaw twitched. Her eyes, now chips of flint, narrowed almost imperceptibly. A bookshop, she stated, her voice devoid of all warmth. How quaint. It reminds me of someone I used to know. A woman named Rose. Rose Bloom. The world tilted. The cheerful sounds of the party faded into a dull roar in Elara's ears. Rose Bloom. Her mother. The blood drained from her face, leaving her cold and dizzy. The lifelong, bitter rival. The woman Genevieve Thorne had spent decades loathing, whose modest flower shop, the Gilded Petal, stood just 2 streets down from her own mother's first, failed interior design studio. The studio Genevieve claimed Rose had sabotaged with a whispered rumor, a story Elara's mother had always vehemently denied. The polite facade on Genevieve's face finally cracked, revealing the raw, unadulterated animosity beneath. She leaned forward, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for Elara. Tell me, dear, does your mother still specialize in weaving pretty lies and selling them with her wilting flowers? The rest of the garden party passed in a nauseating blur. Elara responded to questions on autopilot, her smile a brittle mannequin's grin. She felt Genevieve's gaze on her like a physical weight, a constant, chilling reminder of the chasm that had just opened at her feet. Liam, attuned to her in a way that now felt tragically ironic, knew something was wrong. Are you all right? He asked quietly as they finally escaped to the quiet of his car. My mother can be intense. I'm sorry if she was short with you. Intense was not the word. She was fine, Elara managed, her voice thin and reedy. Just a bit overwhelming. She couldn't tell him. Not here, not now, with the ghost of their mother's war hanging between them in the closed space of the car. She waited until she was alone in her apartment, surrounded by the comforting silence and the familiar scent of her books, before she broke down. Sobs racked her body, born of confusion, betrayal, and a profound, aching loss for something that was being stolen from her before it had even fully bloomed. She picked up her phone, her finger hovering over her mother's contact. How could she even begin? The next day, she drove to her childhood home, a cozy cottage on the outskirts of the city where the air was always sweet with the scent of her mother's prize-winning roses. Rose Bloom was in her greenhouse, her hands covered in soil, humming an old tune. She was the antithesis of Genevieve Thorne, soft where the other was sharp, her beauty rooted in warmth and gentle laughter lines. Elara! What a lovely surprise! She exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile faltered as she took in her daughter's pale, strained face. Darling, what's wrong? Mum, Elara began, her voice trembling. I've been seeing someone. A wonderful man. His name is Liam. Rose's face lit up. That's wonderful news. Tell me everything. I met his mother yesterday. Elara took a shaky breath. Her name is Genevieve Thorne. The effect was as catastrophic as she had feared. The color leached from Rose's face. The small trowel she was holding clattered to the stone floor. Thorne, she whispered, the name a curse. No. Elara, no. The story came out then, not the polished, half-remembered version of her childhood, but the raw, painful truth from her mother's perspective. The dream of the design studio, the whispered accusation from Genevieve that Rose had spread malicious gossip about her clientele, the lost contracts, the devastating bankruptcy that followed. The decades of silent glares at town events, of Genevieve's business soaring while Rose poured her heart into her flowers, a constant, living reminder of the dream that had been stolen. That woman has a heart of stone, Elara, Rose said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She is vindictive and cruel. She ruined me out of sheer spite because she thought I was getting too close to a client she wanted. I will never, ever forgive her. She grasped Elara's hands, her grip tight and desperate. You have to end it. You cannot be with that woman's son. The poison runs in the blood. Elara drove back to the city feeling hollowed out. Her mother's pain was a tangible force, a legacy of hurt she was now expected to uphold. But then she thought of Liam, his laughter, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the quiet strength of his character. Was it fair to condemn him for the sins of his mother? The conflict became a physical pain in her chest, a constant, grinding pressure. She avoided his calls for 2 days, claiming a fictional flu. When he showed up at her bookshop, unannounced, his face etched with concern, she knew she couldn't hide any longer. "Talk to me, Elara," he pleaded, standing amidst the towering shelves. "What happened? Did my mother say something to you? Whatever it was, I'm so sorry." The truth tumbled out, messy and broken. "Liam, my mother. Her name is Rose. Rose Bloom." The confusion on his face was genuine, then slowly, dawning horror as the pieces clicked into place. Bloom. The flower shop. Oh God. He sank onto a nearby reading chair, running his hands through his hair. The feud. That ancient, ridiculous feud. "It's not ridiculous to them, Liam," Elara cried, tears finally spilling over. "My mother told me everything. Your mother accused her of lying, of sabotage. She lost her business because of it." Liam looked up, his gray eyes stormy. "And my mother tells a different story. She says your mother was jealous, that she spread rumors to undermine her. They've both been feeding on this bitterness for 30 years, Elara. It's their reality. But it doesn't have to be ours." He stood and took her hands. "What they have is their problem. We are not them. I am not my mother. And you are not yours. What we have is real. Don't let their past destroy our future." His words were a lifeline, a declaration of war against the legacy of their families. In that moment, surrounded by stories of epic loves and tragic flaws, Elara chose their story. She chose him. It was a choice that came with a cost. Their relationship was forced underground. Dates were no longer casual meetups but carefully orchestrated secrets. They avoided places where they might be seen together by anyone who knew their families. The secrecy cast a long shadow, tainting their moments of happiness with a bitter aftertaste of guilt and deception. Elara felt the strain in the set of Liam's shoulders, saw the worry in his eyes when his phone rang and it was his mother. They were building a beautiful, fragile house on a foundation of sand, and the tide of their mother's hatred was always threatening to wash it away. The fragile truce they had built shattered on a rainy Thursday evening. They were at Liam's apartment, a safe haven they had carved out from the world, cooking dinner and trying to pretend that the outside world didn't exist. Liam's phone, lying on the coffee table, buzzed insistently. It was his sister, Sophia. He answered on speakerphone, his hands covered in flour from the pizza dough they were attempting to make. "Liam, you will not believe what Mum just told me," Sophia's voice, sharp and agitated, filled the room. "She found out. She knows you're still seeing that Bloom girl." Elara's blood ran cold. Liam's face went rigid. "Sophia, it's not like that. Don't, Liam. How could you? After everything that woman's mother did to our family? To Mum. Mum is hysterical. She said it's the ultimate betrayal. She said Rose Bloom must be laughing at her, that her daughter has managed to sink her claws into you to get back at her." The vitriol in her voice was a physical blow. "She's given you an ultimatum, Liam. It's her or that girl. If you don't end it, you are no longer welcome in this family. You'll be cut off. From all of us." The line went dead. The silence in the apartment was heavier than any sound. Liam stood frozen, a statue of anguish, staring at the phone as if it had bitten him. Elara watched the color drain from his face, saw the devastating conflict in his eyes. It was the moment she had dreaded, the moment the abstract threat became a brutal, concrete reality. He didn't look at her. He just walked slowly to the sofa and sat down, his head in his hands. "Liam." Elara's voice was a small, broken thing. "She means it," he said, his voice muffled. "She's formidable when she's been crossed. And Sophia, she'll side with my mother. She always does." He finally looked up, and the torment in his eyes was unbearable. "Elara, they're my family." The words hung in the air, a verdict. In that moment, she saw the little boy who had been raised by a fierce, possessive widow, who had been taught that family was everything, that loyalty was the highest currency. She saw the man torn between that ingrained duty and the love he professed to feel for her. And in his hesitation, in the sheer weight of his silence, she found her answer. The pain was so acute it was almost clinical. It felt like something inside her had been surgically removed, leaving a cold, empty cavity. "I see," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. She stood, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. "I can't make you choose, Liam. And I won't live the rest of my life as a secret, as a source of shame and conflict for you." She picked up her bag, her movements slow and deliberate. "Your family, it's a part of you. A part you're not willing to lose for me. I understand." "Elara, wait," he began, rising to his feet, his face a mask of panic and grief. "No," she said, holding up a hand. The finality in her voice stopped him cold. "Don't. This is the only way it can end. Goodbye, Liam." She walked out of his apartment, out of his life, and into the cold, indifferent rain. She didn't look back. The sound of the door closing behind her was the loudest, most final sound she had ever heard. The weeks that followed were a monochrome landscape of grief. The bookshop, once her sanctuary, felt like a prison of memories. Every book seemed to hold a line he would have liked, every corner whispered with the ghost of his laughter. She functioned on autopilot, serving customers, ordering stock, her smile a fragile piece of theater. Her heart was a raw, exposed nerve. Her mother, though relieved, was wise enough not to say, "I told you so," instead offering silent support and endless cups of tea. Liam tried to contact her. There were calls that went to voicemail, texts that she read but could not bring herself to answer, a single beautiful, heartbreaking letter that she stored, unopened, in the bottom of a drawer. She knew that reading his words would only shatter the fragile shell she was building around her heart. She had to make a clean break, for her own survival. Her salvation, as it had always been, came in the form of a story. Not one she was reading, but one she was living. She threw herself into her work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. She started a community reading group for lonely seniors, hosted local author nights, and began curating a special section for forgotten classics, books that spoke of resilience and second chances. She was rebuilding her world, brick by brick, and this time, she was building it for herself, on her own terms. The pain didn't disappear, but it was slowly being integrated into the fabric of who she was, making her stronger, more empathetic, more deeply rooted. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old books she had bought at an estate sale, she found it. Tucked inside a battered copy of Wuthering Heights was a faded, sepia-toned photograph. It showed two young women, arms linked, laughing uncontrollably, their heads thrown back in joy. They were sitting on a blanket in a sun-dappled meadow, a picnic basket between them. On the back, in elegant flowing script, was an inscription, "Geneva and Rose, Summer of '75. Best friends forever." Elara stared at the photograph, her breath catching in her throat. Geneva. It had to be Genevieve. And Rose, her mother. They looked so young, so happy, so utterly free of the bitterness that now defined them. They weren't just rivals, they had been best friends. The feud hadn't started with a business dispute. It had started with the shattering of a profound friendship. The story she had been told, the story both women had clung to, was only the final chapter of a much longer, more tragic tale. This wasn't just a photograph, it was a key. It changed everything. Armed with the photograph and a courage born of desperation and a flicker of hope, Elara knew what she had to do. She couldn't go to Liam, that bridge felt burned. She had to go to the source of the poison. She had to face Genevieve Thorne. She didn't call ahead. She knew she would be refused. Instead, she drove to the Thorne estate on a quiet Monday morning, when the grandeur of the house seemed muted and still. She rang the doorbell, her heart hammering against her ribs. Genevieve herself opened the door. Dressed in tailored trousers and a crisp white blouse, she looked every bit the formidable matriarch. Her eyes, upon seeing Elara, turned to ice. "You," she spat. "You have a great deal of nerve showing up here. Haven't you done enough?" "I need to talk to you, Mrs. Thorne," Elara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Not as Rose Bloom's daughter, and not as Liam's ex-girlfriend. Just as someone who has found something that I believe belongs to you." She held out the photograph. Genevieve's gaze dropped to it. For a moment, her haughty expression didn't change. Then, her eyes widened. A tremor went through her hand as she reached out and took the photograph. The rigid line of her shoulders seemed to sag. The cold mask of her face fractured, revealing a glimpse of profound, ancient sorrow. She stared at the image of her younger self, at the face of her once best friend, for a long, silent minute. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice stripped of all its venom, sounding old and tired. "It was in a book," Elara said softly. "It seems our mother's story is more complicated than we were led to believe." Genevieve finally looked up at her, and for the first time, Elara saw not a monster, but a woman who had been deeply, terribly hurt. "We were inseparable," she murmured, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "Like sisters. Until him." "Who?" Elara asked gently. "Robert Thorne. My husband." Genevieve's gaze grew distant, lost in the memory. "We both met him at the same time. He was charming, handsome. We both fell for him. He chose me. Rose never forgave me. She said I stole him from her. The business, the sabotage, that came later. It was her revenge. But this," she tapped the photograph, "this was the beginning. This was the first betrayal." Elara's mind was reeling. This was her mother's secret. The unspoken heart of the feud. It wasn't just about business. It was about a lost love, a shattered friendship, a wound that had never healed. "My mother never told me that," Elara said. "She only ever spoke of the business." "Some shames are too deep to speak of," Genevieve said, her voice hollow. She looked at Elara, a new, unsettling clarity in her eyes. "He loved her too, you know. Robert. I think a part of him always did. I lived with that ghost for our entire marriage." She let out a long, shuddering breath. "And when I saw you with my son, history was repeating itself. Another Bloom woman, coming to take what was mine." The pieces fell into place with a devastating clarity. It wasn't just hatred. It was terror. The fear of history repeating, of losing her son to the daughter of the woman who had, in her mind, already stolen a piece of her husband's heart. "I'm not here to take Liam from you," Elara said, her voice firm. "I love him. But I want a life with him that isn't built on the ruins of your past. This grudge has stolen enough. It stole your friendship. It stole my mother's dream. And it's about to steal your son's happiness. Don't you think it's time to let it go?" Genevieve Thorne, the unshakable, looked shaken to her core. She didn't answer, just continued to stare at the photograph of a lost summer, a lost friend. Elara didn't know what to expect. She had planted a seed, but she had no idea if it would grow in the stony soil of Genevieve Thorne's heart. She went back to her life, to her bookshop, the weight on her soul slightly lighter, but the ache for Liam just as sharp. 2 days later, as she was closing up the shop, the bell chimed. She turned, expecting Mrs. Henderson, and found Liam standing in the doorway. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes held a light she hadn't seen in weeks. "She came to see me," he said without preamble. "My mother." Elara's heart stopped. "And she told me everything. About the photograph. About Robert. About her and your mother being friends." He took a step closer. "She cried, Elara. I haven't seen my mother cry since my father died. She said you were right. She said she was so blinded by her own past that she couldn't see my future." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar, weary gesture. "She hasn't forgiven your mother, and I don't think she ever fully will. But she's lifted the ultimatum. She said it's my life, and my choice." The air left Elara's lungs in a rush. She leaned against a bookshelf for support. "I have spent the last month in hell," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting my family. But my family isn't just the one I was born into. It's the one I choose to build. And I choose you, Elara. I should have chosen you that night. I was a coward, and I am so sorry." He closed the distance between them, his gray eyes searching hers. "I love you. Not in spite of our families, but because of who you are. The woman who runs this beautiful, chaotic shop. The woman who was brave enough to face a dragon with nothing but an old photograph. The woman I want to build a life with." Tears streamed freely down Elara's face now, but they were tears of relief, of a hope she had thought was lost. "I love you too, Liam," she whispered. "And I choose you." When he kissed her, it felt different from all the kisses that had come before. It wasn't the thrilling beginning or the secret, stolen moments. It was a homecoming. It was a promise. It was the first page of their own story, one they would write together, free from the shadows of the past. The epilogue was written not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of small, quiet victories. Liam and Elara's wedding was a small, intimate affair. Rose Bloom attended, her posture stiff but her eyes soft with a reluctant respect for the man who made her daughter so radiantly happy. Genevieve Thorne was there, sitting on the other side of the aisle, her gaze averted from Rose, but she came. She raised a glass during the toast. It was not peace, but it was a ceasefire. It was a start. One sunny afternoon, a package arrived at Pet Ale and Spine. It was addressed to Elara. Inside, with no note, was a first edition of Jane Austen's Persuasion, a novel about second chances and love enduring beyond years of pain. Elara knew who it was from. She placed it in a place of honor in the shop's front window. Weeks later, a stunning, modern floral arrangement was delivered to the Thorne Design Studio. The card read simply, "Some friendships may wilt, but the memory of their bloom remains. Rose." Genevieve did not call to thank her, but she did not throw the flowers away. The legacy of petals and thorns would always be a part of their history, a scar on the family tree. But as Elara stood in her bookshop, her hand held tightly in Liam's, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet, she knew that they had planted a new seed. A seed of a different kind of love, one that was conscious, chosen, and strong enough to grow, even in the most wounded of soils. Their story was not an end to the feud, but a beautiful, complicated, and hopeful new chapter.